Commissioner Decker,
Yes, I'm here.
Commissioner Magnera,
I'm here.
and then we do have some of our non-voting members, Director Benner.
I'm here. You went silent from my perspective for a while, so I don't know if you called my name, but this is Sam Pardue and I'm here.
Excellent. Commissioner Pardue, sorry, I think I did miss you. And then Commissioner Potowski.
Here.
Okay. And then we've got some people that are standing in for either directors that are not able to join us today. And so I wanted to just recognize them. Oh, did I? Yeah, I did. Sorry. Oh, first, before we go to the directors, Nels Johnson is joining us for Commissioner Anderson. Thank you for joining. Appreciate that. And then Gabriella is representing the Oregon Health Authority. Thanks for joining us, Gabriella. Danny Norlander is sitting in for Oregon Department of Forestry. Elizabeth Elbell is sitting in for DEQ. And Judith Callens is sitting in for Department of Agriculture. Okay, I got everyone. If I missed someone, one of the commissioners, please do raise your hand and let me know. Great, thank you. We will, as if any other commissioners join, I'll recognize them as they join when we get a break in the flow of the meeting, so that we can make sure their presence here was captured. So thank you. With that, I'll open it up if anybody else has brief updates that they want to, any other commissioners want to give. Okay, I don't see anybody. Well, with that, then I think we can just go ahead and jump into our first agenda item. Let's take stock of the meeting overview first, and then we'll jump into our first agenda item. So today we're going to be talking about the co-benefits and other evaluation criteria that we want to use to help us evaluate the actions that we've identified and evaluated as part of our TIGR modeling effort. We'll get an update on the work of the subcommittee that we convened since our last meeting, and a new proposal from staff on how we should approach that work. Then we'll take a break for public comment, and we'll discuss both what we heard from staff and what we heard from the public, and we'll try and finalize a path forward in terms of how we want to approach the co-benefits and other evaluation criteria and their weighting. At the end of that, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back, do a quick reminder of how we're thinking about approaching the two reports we will be doing in the next couple of months, and then go into a discussion of our draft recommendations. What we're hoping to do today is kind of ask if we're headed in the right direction on how we're thinking about framing the recommendations, see if anything's missing in that from our thinking. And one thing I want to flag is that we decided to hold one of the recommendations specifically to analyzing the two different scenarios and all the actions that we've identified to set a path forward for which actions we want to recommend be advanced to help us accelerate towards our accelerate our climate action in Oregon. And so that's kind of the goal. And then we'll come back and we'll have 2 more meetings to kind of wrap up those more specifics on those draft recommendations. So today it's really just about, are we headed in the right direction? And then in December and in January, we'll have more specific language for commissioners to discuss and finalize. Then after we have the preliminary conversation about the draft recommendations, we'll open it up again for public comment so that we can hear public comment on that as well. Next slide, please, Zach. So just a quick reminder, here's where we are in the process. We're getting to the stage where we're trying to wrap up this project. We've been working on it for a little over a year and are excited to be getting into this last phases of this work. And the 2 topics today are trying to think about the co-benefits and then start to discuss the draft recommendations. Next slide, please. This just kind of reiterates the reason that we're looking at co-benefit and other evaluation criteria is to just help us make sure we're characterizing the actions in ways that help us look at important outputs from taking those actions, the greenhouse gas reduction benefits, as well as the cost effectiveness of different actions, and then taking into consideration some of the other co-benefits. And then secondly, developing out the recommendations on the goal scenarios and actions. Next slide, please. I think I already covered this. We're trying to agree on the co-benefits and evaluation criteria, the definitions of those criteria, and the any sub-criteria within those, and then how much weight we want to give to each of the criteria that we identified, and then get, as I mentioned, initial input on direction on recommendations for the roadmap. Next slide, please. Just a reminder of kind of the process we've used for considering how to incorporate the co-benefits analysis. We had an initial brainstorming and discussion at a couple of meetings last winter on how to include co-benefits in our evaluation criteria. We got some information from our consultants on some of those criteria that we'd identified through the modeling work that they've been doing. We got a straw proposal at our last meeting and provided that so that we could get public comment. The commission discussed the straw proposal. We made some recommendations during our meeting about changes we wanted to see in the proposal, but we really weren't able to get to a point where we were kind of finalizing all of the co-benefits that we wanted and how we wanted to think about those. So we called for the establishment of a subcommittee. That subcommittee met twice, and that input, staff used that input to come up with a new proposal that we'll be discussing today. And then once we finalize that today, we will, ODO staff will go ahead and implement that scoring and the evaluation. So that's the process that we're using to think about how to include co-benefits. I will say that it was challenging, that we had a great subcommittee and a lot of discussion about how to best incorporate co-benefits, how we should define those co-benefits. And we certainly would, I think all agreed that we would have preferred to have had more outreach and discussions, listening sessions with Oregonians, especially on the equity piece. But we did kind of land on some agreement on the best approach going forward, based on the subcommittee discussions and some additional research that staff had done. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Zach, and he'll walk us through the rest.
Thanks, Chair McDonald. Good afternoon, commissioners. Just before I jump in here, just wanted to provide an update that the public comments with the active hyperlinks are now posted on the website. So
Excellent.
Access that if you'd like. So thanks, Chair McDonald, for kicking us off here. Just as a reminder, we included this straw proposal that we had provided for comment and discussion back in October, just to give everyone a little bit of a refresh. And there were 6 main criteria. 3 of those were co-benefits. So the health, jobs, and economic prosperity, and the equity co-benefits. And then there were 3 other criteria, which were cost effectiveness, greenhouse gas emission reduction amount, and risk and uncertainty. And then you can see how they were defined, and I'll, as we go, try to help you all see where the differences are and the like. And then there was a good conversation about a number of different criteria. I'll get into that as well as we go and talk about the updated proposal. And then just as a frame for the moment, the last column there on the weighting, that was the original straw proposal weighting, and you'll see in the updated proposal that there is a different weighting. And again, we'll talk through that, but just wanted to give everyone a picture of where we were and where we might be headed.
Zach, as you're changing slides, I just want to recognize that Commissioner Ross is here. Commissioner Ross, could you identify yourself as being present?
Yes, hello. Faranga Ross is here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Back to you, Zach.
Awesome. Thanks, Chair McDonald. So there was a lot of great conversation at the last meeting. Many of the issues kind of sorted into the overall approach of the scoring. Then there was a lot of conversation around specific criteria. Some commissioners offered ideas about additional criteria that could be included. There were also interests and expressed about refinements to some of the straw proposal criteria. And then again, there was a lot of discussion of weighting, and I'll walk through each of these as we go. And before I change to the next slide, which kind of has the overall resolution that we're proposing on the overall approach, just wanted to tee up some of the questions that came up and kind of where we were in the last meeting, because I think this is really important to make sure everyone is comfortable with the overall approach. And so just as a refresher, essentially commissioners were generally supportive of scoring the actions based on the co-benefits and other evaluation criteria. But there were some concerns about the overall scoring approach, including the need for greater community-based engagement and input to better inform the co-benefits analysis. There were also some questions about how useful the overall scoring exercise would ultimately be, and whether to integrate all of the criteria together or handle as separate data points. For example, just assessing the co-benefits separately, packaging the co-benefits together. There were a lot of different permutations of how we could go about the scoring. So the subcommittee met twice, and as I go through, I'll show and discuss where the subcommittee landed on certain things, as well as some additional staff research that occurred to get to the updated proposal that we included in the memo that is posted on the website. So in terms of the overall approach and how to try to work through those issues that came up at the last meeting, the general sense from the subcommittee was to let's stay on track to develop a co-benefits analysis in time to finalize and deliver the report to the legislature by early next year. But the subcommittee had a number of recommendations around what else to include as we do that. So first, there's interest in looking to incorporate other existing relevant state agency work or learnings. And you'll see in the health co-benefit criteria that I'll talk about later that we did do some of that. The next recommendation was to include a section in the report teeing up equitable implementation questions and ideas. And these are the questions and ideas about will underserved communities, environmental justice communities be prioritized in implementation? And the level of detail of the actions as written right now don't go that far. And so we want to make sure that that is at the top of decision makers' minds as they are reviewing these types of equitable implementation questions. And so there's a recommendation later on about how to talk about and tee up these equitable implementation questions and ideas, but just wanted to say that that is something that the subcommittee thinks is very important to include as part of this conversation. The next thing was to provide the commission with more than just the overall scoring for each action. So as you remember from the Stroud proposal, we had the 6 criteria and they were all going to be scored together, and still planning to do that. But to provide the commission with more information, we're planning to also provide the scoring results for each of the co-benefit criteria individually, and then provide the scoring for all of the co-benefit criteria combined. So that'll just give a couple more data points for the commission to be able to discuss and understand how the scoring is working or not. And that leads to the next piece here, which is to have the commission, once we do the scoring, assess the value of the scoring results and ultimately make a final determination of whether, how to include it, how to use it in development of the roadmap. And as staff will, work to try to provide as much information as the commission needs to sort that out and work through that. But folks felt like it was a useful conversation to have, given some of the concerns about how the co-benefit criteria might play out in scoring the results, that there could be a conversation at the next meeting when we bring the results for the commission to really dig in and decide how to use them moving forward. And then assuming the commission were to want to use the scoring results and co-benefits analysis in the roadmap, acknowledging the limitations of the co-benefits analysis in the actual report. And I would say even if we don't use all of the scoring results to inform and include in the report, that there'd probably also be need to at least explain that there are a lot of co-benefits to climate actions, and maybe more of a qualitative discussion if the commission were interested in that. So I mentioned that there was interest in having a report, a section of the report teeing up equitable implementation questions and ideas. And this last piece here is the subcommittee was really interested in having the commission pursue resources for a next phase of work focused on community engagement and defining how the state should approach equitable implementation of the actions identified in the roadmap. So we would have a section in the report trying to tee up the need for that and what some of those questions might look like. And then potentially for later in this afternoon discussion, draft recommendation around pursuing resources for further conversation around equitable implementation, and ideally that being done with community-based organizations in the forefront of that conversation. So that was a lot. I'm going to pause here and see maybe if there are any questions on this overall approach piece that I just laid out and the kind of proposed resolution of the issues that came up.
And Zach, maybe before we go there, just open it up for members of the commission that were part of the discussion that we had in the subcommittee, if you wanted to add anything, if any of those commission members want to add anything briefly.
I just wanted to say amazing job herding cats, Zach. It was a very very wonderful and collaborative conversation, but we were all over the place. So thank you.
Agreed. Thanks. Any other members of the subcommittee? And do just speak up because it is hard to, for some reason, I guess WebEx doesn't move people up, or at least not on my screen. So, okay, back to you, Zach.
Awesome, thanks. Appreciate the feedback. It was really great to have a subset of commissioners to be able to discuss the intricacies of this. And it is, as Chair McDonald was saying, it's pretty complex, and I think staff is really interested in seeing this as, another data point for the commission to be able to think about what then to recommend. And, we'll do our best to continue to support. And the other piece is that we, because there was a lot of conversation around this, we haven't fully been able to test out all of the scoring, but we think what's in the updated proposal will work, but we might need a minor adjustment here or there as we go. But we would obviously inform the commission of that when we bring back the results. There's a lot more to talk about in terms of the specifics of each of the criteria. So definitely more to shape here, and looking forward to the conversation that follows on the rest of these pieces.
Maybe before we go to public comment, let's ask if any of the commissioners have clarifying questions on what Zach presented as the overall approach, or if you have specific questions on the updated proposal.
And Chair McDonald, I do have a couple more slides to
Great.
give an
Go ahead,
overview
then.
of the specific criteria. So,
Perfect.
but I'll pause to see if there are questions about this overall approach, making sure that folks are still feeling good about moving forward on this, and then I can talk about all of the criteria specific.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Karanga. So I was just going to say, Zach, thank you for sending over the summary deck. That was extremely helpful and informative. And I love the great work in terms of coming up with the proposals, coming through solutions. So I just thought that was extremely valuable. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner Ross. Others? Okay. I think you can carry on.
All right. So we did, as Commissioner Ross was saying, provide that memo with a little more detail than these slides have to try to walk you through our thinking on all of the pieces, but wanted to address some of the bigger issues that came up. So commissioners did have potential interest in additional criteria during the October meeting. And the additional criteria that were previously proposed included resilience, and that was both kind of community and political, avoided risks and associated costs, avoided costs from climate impacts, and timing of reductions. And so based on subcommittee conversation, we didn't see the need to include any as separate new evaluation criteria. And a large part of that was that, as the commission discussed at the October meeting, by adding more criteria, you can potentially dilute the other criteria. And we thought that there were a few criteria that could be tucked in as sub-criteria into the existing criteria. And so we went that route. There were also some questions around whether we would be able to have data for some of these things, or whether they would actually distinguish between the actions. So we did end up including kind of a variation of political resilience. Our understanding of the commission discussion at the last meeting was kind of around political feasibility. So we included that as part of the risk and uncertainty criteria, which I'll talk about a little later. And then we also included the implementation timing, which is kind of the timing of reductions, understanding when we might see reductions and when the timeline for the actual action is it in the near term or in the long term. So that's how we handled the additional criteria. I'll keep running through these, and then maybe we can at the end have questions, just so we can make sure everyone has the full aspect of what what the changes are. So we made a number of changes to the straw proposal. We made some overall presentation changes, and some of these were related to the idea that the commission wanted to be able to better see the co-benefits as a group. And so we basically created 3 groupings. We just put together the greenhouse gas reduction amount and the cost effectiveness criteria into the MAC curve analysis. Those are the 2 components of the MAC curve analysis. So we just made it clear that those are 2 that the commission already largely has through the MAC curve analysis, but we're going to now use that to work through the scoring. And then we grouped the co-benefits together. And then we created an other category, which is risk and uncertainty, because the commission had suggested that the straw proposal include application to the co-benefits. So the commission wanted to know what the risk and uncertainty of actually having the co-benefits happen was important for understanding how to arrange the actions and decide which ones to move forward. So we then also added some further detail on sub-criteria and how the score would be assessed for each of them. We felt like it wasn't totally clear in this original straw proposal, and it would provide a little more detail for folks to understand exactly where we were headed with it. We added a data source that would be relied on for the scoring. So we just put in, for transparency and for folks understanding what we were trying to score, we just noted what data we would be relying on for that particular criteria. Then we made some substantive changes to specific criteria. Those criteria were on health, equity, and then risk and uncertainty. And I'll walk through each of those. And then we made a minor change to the jobs and economic prosperity co-benefit, and that was just grouping two of the sub-criteria that were already there. It basically said that we were going to assess the ability to decrease costs, and we had two separate criteria: building energy use costs, and then we had transportation costs. And so we just put those together because ultimately trying to reduce costs, and we didn't see the benefit of pulling those two out. And that was also one of the recommendations that came through via written feedback in the previous commission meeting. So on the health co-benefit, there's a number of things here. Essentially, the first sub-criteria, which is in the box in the middle there, avoided health impacts and associated cost savings from reduction in air pollution and co-pollutants. You can think of that as the EPA COBRA sub-criteria. And the EPA COBRA data is kind of a known source. And in this original straw proposal, we didn't fully detail out the list of illnesses that are covered in EPA COBRA. And so we did that here. And one of those was asthma. And that was one of the illnesses that that commissioners had some interest in seeing included in the criteria. And so it's already in there via the EPA COBRA data. And we then also just detailed out what the EPA COBRA data is measuring in terms of air pollution, the co-pollutants that it includes. So we thought that sticking with the EPA COBRA data would be a good way to continue to have data, even though it's national level data. It's the best we have at the moment, and it's kind of a known source that we could rely on. SSG has also calculated the EPA COBRA data for each of the actions, so we have that to be able to rank and score the actions. The big change here was we had in the original straw proposal a quality of life sub-criteria. And then there were some suggestions around how to improve upon that particular sub-criteria. And we, as part of trying to figure out how to handle equity, did a little more research on whether we could find some data and information to be able to back up the quality of life sub-criteria. There were things, some of the particular issues were like comfort. And we were able to find a resource from the Oregon Health Authority from 2018. It's a climate change and public health in Oregon report that was used and provided some good analysis around what data is out there in terms of supporting the idea that there are health co-benefits to certain climate actions. And some of those kind of boil down into a couple of different areas where the co-benefits could be seen on the health side. And those were around increasing physical activity through land use improvements and active transportation, improving home indoor air quality and comfort, or improving nutrition through sustainable food systems. Those were pretty high value areas of action that would result in good health benefits. So the other thing that came up and that this allowed us to do was in the commission discussion at the last meeting, there was some interest in including indoor air quality, because EPA COBRA data only applies to outdoor air pollution. And we did see a way to be able to include indoor air quality, and particularly from, there was a suggestion to include the potential health impacts from gas stoves. And so we were able to include that in the indoor air quality grouping here in this second sub-criteria. And there is, some growing evidence around that particular risk. And I do want to say that when we were looking through all the actions, it appeared that there was only one action that really specifically related to that particular issue, and it was the one around having future appliances be electric. And so it shouldn't, that particular piece is not a huge aspect of this particular criteria, but we did tuck it in here, and we'll include it as part of assessing indoor air quality, and wanted to just be able to explain that piece. And then before I leave this second sub-criteria, we also saw...
Zach, apologies for interrupting. We're getting pretty close to our time.
Okay.
I know we probably want to dig into the equity, but we might need to just keep it a little shorter.
Yep. Thanks, Chair McDonald. So we wanted to, this second sub-criteria we can use, we also saw that we could use for the equity co-benefit, because environmental justice communities tend to have a higher burden of disease and health risk factors based on the social conditions around them. And so we think that we can use this second sub-criteria to also be able to score in the equity co-benefit, which leads me to the equity co-benefit. So just say, there's a lot of efforts underway to try to make assessing equity a little easier. So this is a bit of a stopgap effort to try to just ensure that equity is not lost in the scoring effort and in the larger conversation that we'll be having with this report and the recommendations. So what we did here was those, first, we focused the criteria on environmental justice community, serving environmental justice communities. And we're using the definition from HB 4077, which was related to the Environmental Justice Council and the environmental justice mapping tool that will be used as once it's developed, to try to allow agencies to figure out how to better target resources and policies and programs to environmental justice communities. And then, as I mentioned, we thought that we could use some of the health criteria to assess equity. So those are the first two: reduction in air pollution and potential to address other health inequities. And then the third criteria is just one of the criteria that we had in the original STRAW proposal. It was to alleviate energy burden. So that's how we're thinking we can get at equity. Again, there would be more conversation around equity in the teeing up equitable implementation as part of another section in the report, as I discussed earlier. So I think I've just got risk and uncertainty, and I'll be quick here. Basically, what we did with risk and uncertainty was take the commissioner's interests in detailing out what we would be assessing under risk and uncertainty. And so we included technical feasibility, political feasibility, and implementation timing, and then showed, explain where the data would come from. Some of it will be professional discretion because some of the data is not totally there, but that is the hope with this particular criteria. And then lastly, just the weighting of all of the criteria. So we took the feedback from commissioners and basically switched the cost effectiveness and greenhouse gas reduction amount. So cost effectiveness was originally at 25 and the greenhouse gas reduction amount was at 20. So we flipped those to give more priority to the greenhouse gas reduction amount. And the reason the number is a little off is because we just used the average of all of the commissioner submissions that we got with the numerical scoring. And then for the co-benefits, we did overweight the equity co-benefit, and they were all the co-benefits were at 15. So the equity has 16, health co-benefit is 15, jobs and economic prosperity at 14. Not a huge difference, but the interest was in conveying that the priority of these particular co-benefits and the weight of them, and then risk and uncertainty at 11. So that is a summary of the straw proposal. I think the next slide has the is not supposed to be read, but just to show you that it's there and puts all of the pieces we talked about together and is in that memo.
I just want to remind the public that's joined our meeting, if you want to submit public or testify today on the co-benefits proposal that we're considering, we'll be doing that in a few minutes. So please do raise your hand or put a comment in the chat so that we know that you want to testify. And that'll also help us manage our time. But before we go to public comment, are there any kind of critical clarifying questions that people want to ask Zach? Nels Johnson?
Thank you, Chair McDonald. Thank you, Zach. This is really interesting. I think the question I have is, can you talk through with a little more specificity on how you plan to measure or I guess track the progress of these outcomes? I mean, some of these things have multiple factors. So I guess the question I'm asking is, how would you know that whatever policy you put forward is responsible for the gain in co-benefit? So if you just kind of walk us through how you all kind of envision making sure you're able to track the progress and results.
Just a clarification, Nels, do you mean as these are being implemented? Or
yeah. I mean, what is because it's exciting things, but a lot of the problems that are you're trying to solve here have multiple factors, and so I guess the question is how would you know that if you're going to implement a particular policy that would be responsible for say an increase or I guess making air quality better or something like that, or I guess or healthier food systems or things like that. How would you know that the policy that you're recommending would be with the reason why those outcomes improved? I guess that's the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's maybe a little challenging to answer. Go ahead, Zach. Take a shot.
Yeah, I do think part of what you're getting at is why we included that risk and uncertainty criteria in there. It's a little hard to know that there's going to be the particular policy will actually be implemented, first authorized, then implemented, to the extent that we're envisioning here. So I think there is some built-in hedging of, understanding the limits of this analysis, but it is reasonable to think that a certain policy generally will help reduce air pollution. If you're having electric vehicles instead of fossil fuel powered vehicles, it is fair to assume that that will reduce air pollution at some point. And I think this is really just trying to give some indication to folks that these are the potential benefits that could come. And I will say part of why we were leaning a bit on some of the health related benefits is because there is some pretty good research out there about the improvements to providing more active transportation and the connection to then having healthier outcomes for folks.
Well, no, I appreciate that. I guess our hope would be that as you're doing this, you just provide a little more clarity. So, an example, electric vehicles, I think that's right. But also, if all of a sudden people just reduce the amount of driving they do by, say, 25%, that also has an impact. So just so we're able to, my fear is that a lot of this can be really subjective. And so how do we make sure we have as objective of a metric as possible to be able to measure the outcome? So again, let's use the electric vehicle thing as an example. You're able to quantify that, okay, driving numbers are roughly the same, but because more people are switching to electrics, that is what has caused the greenhouse gas emission reduction. But point being, just be able to do the homework.
Yeah, a good point, Nels. The state does track vehicle miles traveled and tracks air quality. And so I think, there are options for being able to kind of reconstruct what might be causing the benefits. I don't think that we are necessarily intending this analysis or assessment to necessarily be something that we track over time. I think it's an interesting idea that it would be great for us to think about. This is really more to just give us some information that we can provide to decision makers about what we expect to have happen, and not necessarily an ongoing tracking. But I like the idea of thinking about how we would go about assessing the results of any given policy, because I think that's important. Duly noted. Thank you for raising that. Any other, Gabriella?
Yes, and apologies, I'm going to jump in, not with a clarifying question because I have to leave for an hour to another meeting. And I'm going to miss the discussion part at 1:30. So just wanted to the point I think you were making right now, Chair, that this, from OHA's perspective, this is giving a sense of the priorities and importance to inform the decisions that legislators and the governor are going to be making with a much broader sideboards than what this commission is able to look at. So in our subcommittee discussions, for example, talking about the fact that the cost that the funding, the budget that the state dedicates to the Oregon Health Plan is a cost, that will be a cost savings to the state that goes beyond what can be captured here. So so just wanted to say our sense of how important this is as sending the message about priorities and the capacity to do this kind of work to the legislators, with the understanding that these details will need a lot more work and effort, and that the commission is going to make the case that further resources to do exactly that analysis and the engagement with community is an important next step that needs to happen, and that will accompany this information. So those were a couple of priorities for OHA in engaging in this conversation. So thank you all, and I'll be back in an hour.
Thank you, Gabriella. I also just want to recognize that Morgan is here from the governor's office. Morgan, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So if there aren't any additional clarifying questions now, we will have time after public comment to come back and talk about this some more and finalize the direction we want to go on this. I don't see any other clarifying questions or hands raised. So with that, let's go to any public comments. And Linda let me know a little while ago that no one appeared to have raised their hand to talk about this agenda item, but just in case someone had trouble. Linda, anybody in the queue?
No, I don't see anyone at this time have their hand up. We do have one individual who is on a call. If you wanted to raise your hand or have a question or would like to have some testimony, go ahead and hit pound 3 or in *3. Well, depending on the phone you own, it's either *3 or pound 3, and that will give you a hand up in my programming. Thank you.
Great. Give a couple of seconds for that person to do something if they want to.
All right, I don't see anything coming.
Okay, great. Well, with that, then we can go right into our discussion about the proposal that's in front of us. I would like to preface this with I don't know that we want to lock in the direction that we give staff. I think they will learn as they go a little bit, and they might might come back with a slightly different proposal based on how they what they learn when they go through the process. So I don't think the commission should really lock in on necessarily an exact methodology, but I'm really interested in hearing commissioners' thoughts. If this sounds like the right direction, if you think the general approach is right based on what Zach put in front of us, and then if you have any thoughts about the specifics that are proposed here in terms of how to rank things and the weighting. Those are the things that I think we need the commission needs to discuss and provide that direction. But I don't think we want to lock folks in too much. But with that, I'll open the floor. The one question I had as we were going through the slides, Zach, was on the equity slide, or on the weighting, excuse me, the weighting slide. So maybe you can go back to that weighting slide. It said overweighted equity that we should, and I wanted to get clarification on that. So was that a comparison of the original weighting for equity and the weighting that is recommended here in front of us? And was that to increase the weighting, or did the weighting go down? Could you clarify that comment?
Yeah, thanks, Chair McDonald. It was to increase the weighting of the equity co-benefit, so increase the number. All 3 co-benefits, equity, health, jobs, and economic prosperity, were at 15 each in the original straw proposal. And so, as you can see, we've adjusted slightly to be able to show an indication of prioritization of these co-benefits. They're all important. And again, we were using the averages of what the commissioners had sent in. Some commissioners also sent numerical changes on the weighting after the meeting. And so we just averaged those out, and that's how we ended up with it. I think also with the equity co-benefit piece, although it's just one number difference, we did talk earlier about having separate kind of section teeing up equitable implementation and talking about some of the other things that we felt like we couldn't really get at with the data we have and the complexity of assessing equity. So I think there's room also there for some more qualitative discussion of the importance of equity.
And then the other question I had, the risk and uncertainty, I think on that slide, and I may have misheard, you focused in on the risk and uncertainty of achieving the co-benefits. And I thought that we were focusing more on the risk and uncertainty of achieving the greenhouse gas reduction. And so that was a second question that I had when we were going through this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair McDonald. It's both. Their original straw proposal just focused on the greenhouse gas emission reduction and the cost effectiveness criteria and assessing risk and uncertainty of achieving those. And based on commissioners' comments about also wanting to understand the risk and uncertainty in getting the co-benefits that we're assessing, we added that we would look at risk and uncertainty for both the greenhouse gas reduction amount and cost effectiveness, but also the co-benefits.
So then just to make sure I'm tracking, so we would do 40% on the greenhouse gas reduction, 40% on the, of the sub-criteria on the cost effectiveness, and 20% on achieving the co-benefits. Is that the right way to read this?
So it's
excuse me, no, I see what you're referring to now.
yeah, so the allocation, is just for the sub-criteria. And we think we chose these 3 sub-criteria: technical feasibility, political feasibility, and implementation timing, to be able to, we thought that they would apply to both whether you're going to get greenhouse gas emission reductions or whether you're going to get the health co-benefits that you're hoping for. If something's not technically feasible, you're not going to get either of those. So we tried to create criteria that would apply to both. And that's how we ended up where we are here.
Thank you, Zach, for that clarification. Sorry for not tracking that.
No worries.
Any other, there we go. Commissioner Apter?
Thank you. Seems like we're digging into the weights right now, so I'm just gonna share some thoughts. My sense of the goal of this many month-long process is how can we make sure that Oregon is moving forward and adopting policies to achieve our emissions reduction goals. So it does seem to me that an even stronger weighting for greenhouse gas reduction amount would make sense. And I think that's especially important in terms of the cost effectiveness weighting. There are some limitations I think that we've discussed as a group in terms of the criteria that are included in that cost effectiveness, including, importantly, we're not able yet to quantify the significant, billions of dollars in incentives coming down from the federal government that will reduce upfront costs of certain policies and actions. And we're also not considering related infrastructure costs. So I think there are some limitations there that would give us reason to lower the weighting for that potentially, or at the very least would like to consider, ways that we could increase or better prioritize greenhouse gas reduction amount here. And I seem to remember that only a subset of commissioners were able to provide feedback, at least initially, on the weighting. I'm not sure whether others have been able to weigh in since that time, but would welcome maybe a second round of input there.
Yeah, we did get I think maybe another 5 scorings after the meeting that we had. Do you have a proposal for how much you would drop cost effectiveness and increase greenhouse gas weighting?
Sure. I guess just to throw something out there, maybe 29 or 30 for greenhouse gas reduction amount, which I think would get us to 15 or 14 for cost effectiveness, more in line with the co-benefit weighting.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Apter. Any comments on that as a proposed idea? Scanning the room. I like the idea. I think it makes sense. Commissioner McNair?
Yeah, I would support that idea as well, in particular because cost effectiveness is not a terribly good tool from an equity perspective. Often things that are most cost effective are not necessarily the things that serve low income or environmental justice communities. And so the cost effectiveness measures or our rating valuing may conflict with some of the co-benefits that we spend a lot of time discussing and trying to value in this work.
Thank you, Commissioner McNair. Any opposing opinions on making that kind of a change? Is there someone weighing in? Okay. I think that was just some background noise.
As Commissioner Reitman, I'd like to say that there's a lot of things we don't know the future will bring as far as cost effectiveness. I think that's probably hard to measure in the present because, for example, as you mentioned, the federal money coming down was something we would not have anticipated. So maybe we should, I would endorse that we really emphasize the greenhouse gas reduction. So just to
Great.
back that up.
Thank you, Commissioner. Great. Well, let's propose to drop cost effectiveness by 5 and increase greenhouse gas reduction by 5. The only other one that kind of stood out for me was the equity co-benefit and whether that should have more weighting. But I am not sure I know where I would take the weighting from. Anyone else have any thoughts around the equity rating?
Commissioner Reitman, again, this is related to equity and also risk and uncertainty. But for example, if we electrify the economy and then we don't have the capacity to produce electricity without firing up the gas plants and the coal-fired plant, for example, we're reducing the greenhouse gas in the city, but we're increasing it in the place where the power is being generated. So just, there's some things we need to keep in mind. We need to, maybe that's already happening, but do we know that we have the capacity if everybody's charging their vehicle at night? Do we have the capacity to do that without burning fossil fuels?
That's certainly something that we're going to need to pay close attention to as we change our power systems. So a really good thing for us to flag and to keep at the top of mind as we continue to kind of refine these ideas that we're discussing and as decision makers think through alternatives, that reliability is critical. Commissioner Potowski?
Yes, I just want to remind people that, although these categories we have here seem what independent, they really are interdependent with one another. You know, if you to get some of the health co-benefit, you need to first reduce the greenhouse gases. And then also some are in conflict with one another. They're trade-offs. You increase one, you may decrease the other. So in terms of your weighting and so on, you know, I really think one of the largest items that's going to affect all of them is the greenhouse gas reduction amount. And all the others, in a sense, are dependent somewhat on that one criteria. And then the other ones is your trade-off, what you think is a higher perspective, and recognize that they are interdependent somewhat with each other.
Agreed. That was a really good point. Thank you. And that's kind of speaks to some of the interest that we had in being able to look at these individually as well as collectively and as one score. Any other proposed changes to the weighting? Okay. Hearing none, I think we can give staff direction. Oh, excuse me. We have someone who would like to speak to the commission, who is supporting higher greenhouse gas weighting. So perhaps we don't need to unmute you unless you want to talk. I think you can unmute yourself, and we did save some time for public comment. So happy to have you make a comment if you want to say something in addition to just that general support. Okay. Great. Then did anyone have any comments or recommended changes to how the criteria are being defined and evaluated?
Susan, you have been unmuted.
Okay, here I am. Great.
Okay.
This is Suzanne Carlson with ODOT, and I apologize. I was trying to call in and it wasn't working. Yeah, I just wanted to second what Commissioner Apter and the others have said, which is I would support a high greenhouse gas weighting, and maybe pilot a couple projects through the weighting, because I was thinking a project that really doesn't have a lot of greenhouse gas benefit could be really high on everything else, and that might put it forward ahead of things that really had a good greenhouse gas benefit. So since that's kind of front and center criteria, I just think maybe testing a few things through our methodology and just making sure it gives us the outcomes that we all value would be good.
Yeah, and then that's where I think giving a little bit of freedom to the staff as they start to go through the ranking to be able to assess if they think some tweaks need to be made in how they do that to reflect the kinds of comments the commission has given and the general direction that we're asking them to go in. Thank you, Suzanne. Okay. Hearing no or seeing no hands up to talk about specific criteria and how they're defined. I think we can close this agenda item. I want to thank Zach and Alan for the great work that they did on this. I really want to thank the subcommittee members who participated in the discussion. As mentioned earlier, we really dug into this and had a lot of different opinions that were taken into, that we tried to take into account and kind of collectively tried to explore all the possibilities. And I think, as Gabriella said, it was staff did an excellent job of kind of shepherding us and then also responding to all the good discussion that our subcommittee and the commission had before that, and kind of landing in a place so that we can move forward with this work. And just want to remind folks that we also outlined an overall approach that gives us some also some flexibility when we come back and see the results in December to decide how we best use this information in framing and evaluating actions and making recommendations to decision makers on how to better understand the benefits, the co-benefits and direct benefits of all these different actions. Any closing comments on this topic from others? Okay, I don't see any. So with that, we can go to break. I think we have a 15-minute break scheduled. Zach, am I correct on that?
Yep.
Great. So if people can be back at 1:35, we can move on to our next agenda item, and we'll actually be a little ahead of schedule. So let's meet back at 1:35. Thank you. Let us know that you're back. We can restart the meeting. Like we may still be missing a few people. Give it another minute.
The recording's back going.
Thank you. Okay. Let's get started again. Next slide. Please, Zach. So the second part of our meeting, we are going to do a quick review of the upcoming reports and what they are intended to do, and go over the timeline that we're anticipating. Then we'll have a discussion of the draft recommendations, and then we'll take another public comment. If you are interested in providing public comment on the draft recommendations, please do let us know early that you're interested in commenting. So if you could, try and let us know, say within the next 20 minutes that you're interested in commenting on our draft recommendations, that will just help us manage our time better and anticipate who might want to provide additional comments. Won't preclude if you have a thought that you want to share with us based on some of the discussion that the commission has. Certainly won't cut it off completely, but it just will help us better manage our time. And then we'll go to next steps. So that's the game plan for the rest of our time together. Next slide, please. Just jump into the upcoming report. Just a reminder, the commission is required to provide a biennial report to the legislature. We are technically required to do that by March of odd years. In the last couple of reports, we've tried to do in the fall of even years to try and get the information to legislators and decision makers in advance of the session. And so we are planning to deliver a biennial report. That biennial report is really, the requirements in it are to report on how the state is doing towards reaching our emission reduction goals. We use the data that DEQ provides to us from the emissions, the sector-based emissions data that they manage to inform that assessment. We have a few other requirements for what we can put into the reports. Typically, we talk about some of the advances in policies and programs, whether they're work that the commission's doing or that other agencies are doing. We'll certainly want to reference some of those things at a pretty high level and just recognize where we are. We will include the forecast, the new forecast that we have in that report as well. And then we also will be delivering the roadmap to 2035 that will have a detailed explanation of the modeling that we've been doing, and will also include all of the recommendations that we're going to be discussing in our next agenda item. And that will be finalized over the next couple of meetings. Next slide, please. So this is how we're anticipating that being those two reports being completed. We're going to keep the commission mostly focused on the roadmap and the recommendations, given that we are kind of separating those into the roadmap and aren't anticipating additional recommendations in the biennial report that we give to the legislature. We will plan to have the two reports kind of reference each other so that it's very clear to decision makers that, you know, it's important to kind of look at both of those reports to take stock of where we are and where we need to go. So we are anticipating and almost ready to set a date for our next commission meeting, which will be in December. We'll have an additional commission meeting in January, exact date to be determined. And then hopefully if we need to do some additional modeling of actions, SSG will help us with that. The proposal is that we keep the full commission focused in on the language and the recommendations, because we all know that it's important to get words right when we're making recommendations to decision makers. But we would certainly welcome eyes on the full report as well. And our thought was that I imagine we would get some input on the full report, and then a subcommittee could kind of go through that and provide additional direction to staff for finishing that. And then that we would then try and deliver the published report to the legislature by mid-February. So that's the proposed plan. Any questions on that plan? Or comments? I don't see any. If you have a comment and I missed your raised hand, feel free to jump in.
Hi, Chair McDonald. This is Commissioner Apter. I think this is great, and I really appreciate the tight timelines. I know we're feeling the urgency and wanting to get these done, and we'll all work to make sure that happens. My only flag is, given the Thanksgiving holiday next week, we may want to just consider a day or two wiggle room for that first round of comments on draft recommendations. I know the public has been weighing in throughout the process, but just recognizing that might be somewhat tight for folks who are taking time around Thanksgiving. So maybe we don't need to incorporate it now, but we just might want to consider that as we get closer to that deadline.
Great point. So adding a couple of days to the post-action scoring or comments, the written comments, so a few days after December 11th. Is that what you're thinking of? Oh, apologies. Sorry. No, I see. It's the first set. Yes, we have had the recommendations out. People were asked to comment and send us those comments by the 9th. I don't see a reason why we couldn't maybe extend the deadline on written comments a few days. Zach, is there anything from your perspective that would have an impact on?
No, Chair McDonald, thanks for asking. And I think we can accommodate that. It looks like from the doodle poll that we have out for the December commission meeting that it might be later towards the that range there. It's supposed to be December 14th to 20th there. Sorry about that. But it's looking further down that range. So that is, we can probably be able to deliver what we need to for that meeting.
Great, thank you. So maybe when you, I don't think we've posted this PowerPoint deck yet, but maybe when we do, we can make sure we update this so that people can find it in the deck. And then we can also, when we put out the press release for the meeting, we can also mention, comments are welcome by, and include the date there so that the public knows when they can, when we're hoping to hear back from them. Any other comments on the proposed path forward or the two reports and their purpose? Okay. Excellent, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the discussion of the framing of the recommendations. And I'll take the first slide and then maybe turn it over to you. So as staff and I discussed how do we want to frame the draft recommendations, we thought it might make sense for us to have kind of 6 major types of recommendations that we wanted to make sure we captured in the roadmap. Very importantly, support for continued implementation of the climate programs and regulations that have already been adopted or are under development. That's a critical piece. As we've learned over the last several months, we've got some great policies and programs in place that if they work well and as intended, they will take us a long way towards our ambition for climate action. But they're very big and complicated programs that are among those things that have been adopted. And so we want to make sure that the agencies get support so that they can do a great job of implementing those programs. The second was to consider updating our state greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, both an interim goal, and we can dig more into that, as well as potentially strengthening the 2050 goal. The third category is to talk through new actions that the legislature or the executive branch should take to help us accelerate our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals based on kind of the best current thinking on the need for us to all do that. Finally, or fourth, to identify some specific funding needs, future studies, and the funding needed for future studies so that we can continue to guide our climate action over time. When we went into this project, we recognized that, setting one roadmap today and assuming that that's going to help guide all of our actions to reach the goals that we have today or new goals that we might recommend wouldn't be sufficient. And so we had identified the need to do some follow-on work, as we discussed earlier today. Some of the ambition to do more to engage Oregonians, especially in the equity discussion, but probably other discussions as well, to better inform how we design policies and programs, to not just look at the what that we think needs to happen, but also the how they should be designed and implemented to be most effective for Oregon. Fifth, we've kind of long recognized that the commission is not resourced adequately to really ensure that we are able to integrate all of the great things that are that agencies and private sector and are doing around climate action in order for us to make sure we're providing the best guidance over time on our climate action. We really need more capacity to do that within the commission. And so we have some recommendations associated with that. And then finally, given the new funding that's available, will be available to the state of Oregon from the two recent bills, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that, you know, the more we can do to position the state to be able to take advantage of those significant funding sources, and any new sources will be really important for us to think through. So that's the broad framing. What we're looking for today is just, are we headed in a right direction around this framing? And then certainly want to hear from commissioners, any clarifying questions or comments, what's missing, that we want to make sure we add to the framing and to the specifics. And we can go into a discussion of this. Will you go back a slide? We do have a little more time than we had budgeted, but I also want to make sure that we're focusing in on the recommendations that that commissioners want to make sure we discuss today. So if you have, for commissioners, if you could go ahead and put in the chat the items here that you're most interested in just further discussing today, that'll just help us manage our time a little bit better. Wanted to just emphasize that we are not planning to talk about the third major recommendation, which are all the new actions, because we wanted to hold that until we had completed the analysis of co-benefits and the full evaluation criteria. So we'll put that on pause today and spend the bulk of our time in December really trying to dig into that specific objective, as well as make sure that we're comfortable with the wording of the other ones. But that's I just wanted to clarify that'll be a pretty important, obviously, and relatively big section of the roadmap that we develop out. Zach has the memo at hand too, so we can walk through any particular specifics that people want to discuss. I'm not seeing anybody put things specifically in the chat.
It's like Commissioner Apter included most interested in discussing items number 1, 2, and 6 in the outline.
Okay. Any others? Maybe we can do it with, rather than doing it in the chat, you know, if people want to just shout out. So we've got a 5B.
Commissioner, I don't know if it came through, but I put in the chat that I'd like to talk about number 2, the goals.
Great. Thanks. Any other ones we want to make sure we discuss today?
Yes,
Kristen,
I'd
did
like
you-
to make sure that we fully fund the Tigger analysis so that it remains relevant and up to date. And then also appreciate the work that the commission is doing, and Zach being on board has been a great help, I think. And so we need to make sure there's enough resources to continue that.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Commissioner Sharon, did you have another comment?
No, sorry, didn't take my hand down.
That's okay. Okay. Well, so we have 1 and 2 and 6, which are single-parted items, and then 5B, and then it sounded like some of the potentially some of the studies that we might want to have a discussion about. So one thing I will say, in the draft, in the public comments, we got some really good input from commenters. One of the things that one person recommended or thought was missing was education, and that should be maybe an important part of how we do this, because it'll be important to make sure we're educating people so they know how to what they can do to reduce emissions, but also to help inform the conversation in Oregon as we take on this important work. So I appreciated seeing that. The other thing I wanted to just flag for commissioners from the public comment was reference to the Oregon Policy Simulator, Climate Policy Simulator, and report that was completed in September this year from the Lewis and Clark, or by Lewis and Clark, that does set out a roadmap. I thought it was very well done. I've just had a chance to kind of skim it. I haven't fully digested it, but I thought it was well organized, and that it was something that I would encourage the public and commissioners to take a look at and see what we might want to reflect that's in that plan. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. And, in terms of the policy simulator, just, one of the benefits that was, or pluses that was pointed out in the comment letter, was just the value of having an interactive tool that people could see the assumptions and see what changing the assumptions would do for reducing emissions. So I think that is something that we should aspire to, and figure out how we could collaborate where appropriate on that. We have had several meetings with the folks that did that policy simulator to compare notes, and I think positively, a lot of the results that we have, that both the work that we've done as a commission and the Department of Energy, and the work that was done through that project have complementary or similar kind of benefits, show similar benefits of being more aggressive on reducing greenhouse gas emissions for creating jobs and reducing costs and money that goes out of the state, and the like. So health benefits. So lots of good overlap in the kind of direction and the scale of the benefits that we can get by accelerating our ambition. So I just wanted to flag those two. There are other comments that I think were really helpful. So I would encourage commissioners to take a look at the comments that we already have received before our December meeting, as well as any new comments we receive, because I think they've got some really good thoughts in it that we should try and capture in the roadmap. So with that, Zach, you can go ahead and call up the specific memo so that we can refer to that. but there was an interest, I think Commissioner Apter, you were interested in starting with a conversation about number one.
Yes, thank you, Chair McDonald. So I mean, really glad to see a top recommendation being supporting continued implementation of our existing programs and regulations. But I think it's really important that that also include recommended additional actions that will ensure those reductions happen at the pace and scale necessary and as intended, as well as to enable an equitable and affordable transition under existing policies. I know we have had a number of conversations around this, but in particular, you know, we've seen the Climate Protection Program has a really important role to play in achieving our existing greenhouse gas reduction targets, but that is a unique policy in that it's a cap. And so, you know, like all other jurisdictions with cap-like policies, we know that complementary policies are necessary to efficiently and affordably and equitably drive emissions reductions down in the covered sectors. The cap is a backstop, but we need complementary programs to achieve those goals. And that's something former director or DEQ Director Whitman explained really clearly in his presentation to the EQC ahead of consideration of the CPP rules. And I think something that we need to carry forward in these recommendations. So I'll just leave it there. Happy to add more, but would love to see that incorporated into number one.
Great. Great. Thank you. Commissioner Pardue? Were you have a comment on number one?
Actually, right. The question I wanted to ask about second wait.
You're cutting in and out a little bit, at least on my end.
I'll wait until later. It's regarding 4A.
Okay, great. And I have now on deck 1, 2, 6, 5B, E, F, and 4A. So if commissioners have others, let us know. But Commissioner Sheeran.
Yes, hi, thanks, Chair. With regards to number one and maybe a bridge to number two, which I also wanted to discuss, is we're talking about updating our GHG emission reduction goals, but also wanting to support implementation of existing policies and programs. I guess my hope would be that the discussion around any new emission reduction goals would reflect those that have, you know, currently are in process of being implemented, whether that's through regulatory programs at DEQ or, you know, through legislation that was set in recent years that we're just starting to implement, like HB 2021. I think the risk of, you know, changing the goalpost while those programs are sort of in critical early stages of, you know, being set up and regulated parties being sort of, you know, given the direction they need to be compliant, could actually potentially undermine our goal of wanting to support that, you know, the implementation and success of those programs. So hoping to see alignment between points 1 and point 2. And then my question for point 2 that we can flag for when we come back to it is, are we talking about establishing these goals in statute and updating our state statutory goals, or would these just be goals that the Global Warming Commission would establish without that sort of binding constraint for the state?
I think that's a great question, Commissioner Sheeran. We have been considering advancing some legislation that could be used to, you know, achieve some of these, including putting new goals into statute. But would be interested in hearing your thoughts on alternate, you know, the pros and cons of that. And then Commissioner Sheeran, you know, if you could maybe describe, because you certainly thought a lot in your last job, and I imagine a lot more in this job, maybe not a lot more, but a lot in this job as well, about the state's goals and how different policies intersect. And so I'd love to hear any more specifics about the way that you're thinking about the existing policies and programs, and then we can come back and I'd love to hear your thoughts also on the or how you think that might impact the existing policies and programs, and then we can come and get your input too on recommendations on the different choices that we had identified and how we might think about updating the goals.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Chair, if you just want my initial thought, not knowing specifically what goals you may have in mind for 2035 and 2050, is that we're kind of currently in a situation where, both, policy and, regulation, have goals that are now more ambitious than, what was, set by the legislature many, many moons ago. The governor's executive order established, higher goals, but for executive agencies. But that next step of sort of updating state law to be reflective of goals, which were, the state is already moving forward with, you could say, through implementation, through state agency actions, you have that misalignment. And so that may be an opportunity to discuss in the next legislature.
Thank you. Other comments on number 1?
Yeah, Chair McDonald, this is Janine. I just want to reiterate Commissioner Apter's point about using that first recommendation to clarify that there's still a lot of work that needs to happen on these existing policies and programs, and there may be additional actions that need to be taken by the legislature and by other implementers to make sure that they happen. I think there's some confusion around the Tigger analysis showing that we're on the path to meet our goals. And I don't think any of us means that, okay, so we can sit back and not do anything anymore because we're going to get there. It's like there's targets of 100% clean electricity, but a lot needs to happen in the interim till 2040 to make sure that happens. And buildings is the same thing. So it's not necessarily a change to that, but when we talk about supporting implementation, we may need to support it, may need to support achievement of existing programs with additional actions that both ensure success and also address equitable equity as well.
Thank you, Director Benner. And in thinking about the additional actions, you're not thinking about the additional actions that we've analyzed as a part of increasing ambition, but even a new set of actions that might be needed by decision makers to make sure the existing programs are implemented well. Am I reading you right?
Yes, and I don't know that we know what the actions are, but for example, in order to facilitate the achievement of the 100% clean goal, we may need some more transmission, for example, or in order, I forget what the buildings ones are in there, but we may need to, set up some new programs to do existing building decarbonization to help us reach the goals in the Clean Power Plan. I don't have any particular ones in mind, but just sort of illustrative examples there.
Yeah, very helpful. And, I think just to remind all of us, we did discuss the fact that we're going to be learning a lot as we go. And, that's why we want to try and keep this roadmap fresh and reflective of the best information that's out there. And several of the two biggest policy levers that we analyzed are House Bill 2021 and the CPP. And as we see those two big programs being implemented, definitely we'll potentially we'll learn a lot from some of the processes that'll be going on through DEQ or through the PUC to help shape what implementation looks like, as well as from the utilities and the regulated entities who will be operating under those. Thank you. Commissioner Sheeran?
It's just me forgetting to take my hand down again.
No worries, thanks. Great. Okay, hearing nothing else on 1, let's move to 2. And Zach, could you bring up the memo? Please.
Chair McDonald, I should be sharing. Are you not able to see that?
No, I'm seeing the outline of draft recommendations. How about others? Yeah, it looks like Director
Okay.
Gunner is shaking her head, so
All right, let me,
maybe stop sharing and start again. Commissioner Magnera? No, it is
Yeah,
much
just
easier.
as a comment, still on 1, I want to hit on something that Director Benner said around like the equitable piece of implementation. I think as we got at with the TIGR analysis, that it matters how the work is done and who benefits or who programs are designed to benefit specifically. So I think that's a key element, and this is probably a comment I'll make on each of these recommendations, is ensuring that there is an equity component of that, and that is woven throughout this report.
Thank you, Commissioner Magnera. Okay, so now we can see the memo. Now it's gone. In the memo, we reminded readers that we have existing goals in statute. To Commissioner Sheeran's point, we also have a goal that the governor goals that the governor put in her executive order that strengthened those. Then the analysis that we have done has shown us that we can be potentially more ambitious than that. And certainly the recent reports from IPCC have emphasized the need to really up everybody's game to strengthen our efforts and ambition with respect to reducing emissions, given the impacts that we're seeing and the challenges that we're having in meeting even the goals that we have set out for ourselves but globally. So and that was emphasized at COP last week, and imagine will be in the news quite a bit in the second part of being reflected in the second part of COP. So can you scroll down a little bit so that we can look at the kind of the options that we outlined? Of course, there's a page break always. So in terms of just, some discussion on options, we proposed 3 options. There may be other permutations, but one being adopting the goals that were in the executive order for 2035 and 2050, which is kind of the next item down. We could accelerate achieving the 2035 goals and propose to achieve them by 2030. Or we could strengthen the 2035 goal to reflect the fact that we want to try and achieve the current 2035 goal by 2030. And so we could set a new, more ambitious goal for 2035. And as Zach and I and Alan and I have discussed these different options, there are pros and cons of having different dates and where to kind of focus our attention. We talked a little bit about the fact that if we set a new 2030 goal that is based on the 2035 goal, that then we have a 20-year span to 2050, and having something a little later you know, keeping a stronger goal at 2035 might be more helpful for long range planning for the entities that need to plan for how to reduce our emissions. So those were some of the comments that we talked about. I'm trying to think of others, but Zach, do you want to add any specifics in terms of, you know, how we came up with these three alternatives and some of the pros and cons of these three alternatives?
Thanks, Chair McDonald. I think you did a great job laying it out, so I don't have anything to add at the moment.
Commissioners, any comments about the three alternatives? Commissioner Apter.
Waiting to see if anybody else wanted to chime in, but I'm happy to kick us off. I guess just first and foremost, really strongly support this recommendation to adopt updated state greenhouse gas reduction goals. As we've talked about, the goals currently in statute are very much outdated at this point. And while we do have the executive direction, I think it's really vital that we update the current goals in statute. And I think, as you laid out, there's a number of ways we could do this. I think what's most important is that the science be our guidepost. So would really encourage that whatever we adopt, it's in line with the best available science. Of course, there's the COP conference ongoing. I think would highly support referencing the IPCC's recommendations in terms of both a near-term goal and a 2050 goal. And would also suggest that this recommendation not just recommend adopting updated state greenhouse gas reduction goals now, but also maintaining goals that are in line with the best available science, because we know we continue to have a better understanding in terms of our needs and the emissions reductions that we need to achieve to avoid the worst impacts.
Really good point, Commissioner Apter. Elizabeth, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any relevant information on the most recent emissions, sector-based emissions that you think might be helpful to this conversation, welcome any input. But maybe I'll let you think about that a little bit and go to Commissioner Sheeran. Do you want to come back and just maybe explain your thoughts relative to these alternatives?
Sure. I mean, I think it is time to update those very antiquated goals that are in state law to, you know, at a minimum align with the policy direction that state agencies are already taking, which, depending on which program you look at, has different goals for different sectors, but all, I think, arguably more ambitious than what is in statute currently. So I think it certainly would support a recommendation to the legislature to update the state's GHG goals to be in line with current science.
And you mentioned that you know there is some risk to effective implementation if we aren't mindful of.
Yeah, I think that's just something that, I mean, and probably a conversation with some of the agencies who are most, you know, impacted, who have adopted programs, you know, through administrative rule, under the guidance of the governor's executive order, that in so doing, this doesn't immediately trigger any kind of, you know, going back to the drawing board on any of those programs, or, you know, moving the goalposts, particularly with that 2035, you know, 2030 and 2035 timelines, you know, being relatively closer in ways that, you know, disrupt, you know, the ability to move action forward under those programs. So I think that's a consideration. It's, you know, it may not that may not be ultimately a concern, but I think it's a consideration as we think about how to
Absolutely.
get to greater alignment across programs that have already been kicked off and some state goals that are at this point well out to date with the best available science.
Great, yeah, and we have the information, at least the projected information of what those programs will do based on the requirements in those programs that we can use to help inform the specifics of the recommendation. Would you recommend sticking with a 2035 goal versus focusing in on a 2030 goal? Do you see pros and cons of that? Would it make sense to go ahead and keep, try and have a 2030 goal and a 2035 goal? Any comments from Commissioner Sharon or any others on the timing for that goal?
Again, I think I think we'd have to sit down and sort of compare, like, what does the proposed revised 2030 goal, how does that align with the trajectories that, are already in place? So, in the power sector, for example, as regulated under HB, 2021, the reduction goal by 2030 is already more steep than this for that sector, as was deemed appropriate by the legislature. So I think it's looking across other programs and then, asking is if we change the goal to a 2030 goal and we make it more ambitious across the board statewide, can the state actually demonstrate success with, at that point, just 7 years left? So we want goals to be meaningful, but we also want goals that are achievable as well. So I think that would be the comparison that would be worth exploring, given all of the things that are already in the works to start to reduce emissions by 2030 and 2035. How close or far off do we get from these state goals as articulated and proposed here?
It's good thoughts and good direction that we can give the staff in terms of coming back with a specific proposal. Thank you. Other comments on the 2035 goal or the 2030 goal, depending on which we change?
Just a comment that, like as Nora pointed out, the science is evolving, and so we can't predict very accurately where we will be. So that's why we need to continue to update it. And then perhaps somebody could explain, I think I know the answer, but the benefit of having it in statute, if we all have the same goal, then why do we need to have it in statute?
That's a great point. Generally speaking, these have been identified as targets in statute. I think getting legislative, this is just my sense of it, getting legislative concurrence on establishing goals makes it such so that I think that branch of government would be more aware of it and would be paying attention to it, despite the fact that they might just be targets. That's my take. If others have other takes on the importance of having it in statute, that would be, feel free to raise those. And then Elizabeth, I see that you've got your hand up, so we'll go to you after anyone else wants to chime in on the importance of getting goals in statute.
This is Commissioner Apter. I'm happy to chime in on that point, Kathy. Or sorry, Chair McDonald. I think, of course, right now I think it's especially confusing having two very different goals. One, the very outdated goal that's in statute, and then the executive direction, which is already somewhat outdated. So especially as we're thinking and considering additional policies, it's helpful to have something in statute to follow. So if we're looking at, how do we achieve our goals in a given sector, being able to tie that to something that has been legislatively adopted is really important. And I think there's just having consistency and clarity is also helpful for state agencies as they're moving forward with their, various programs and policy implementation as well.
Thank you. Anyone else on that point? Elizabeth, I noticed you took your hand down. I don't know if that means, or maybe
No,
it just came down.
I just wanted to, yeah, I just wanted to respond to your kind of question earlier, if it adds context or value to the conversation. I'm Elizabeth Elbel with Oregon DEQ, and I work on our sector-based inventory. We're currently in the process of updating it through 2021. I guess this isn't necessarily a spoiler for everyone, but we did see with our data, which we use state level greenhouse gas reported data, that emissions dipped in 2020. I think that was largely expected, understanding the trends in the transportation sector during the pandemic. It was also like a relatively good hydro year. The 2021 preliminary data is indicating that we're trending back up to where we were around in the 2019 levels. And I think that the programs that we have in place just haven't been in place long enough to impact the actual emission trends that we're seeing right now. So just in summary there, like, we're not seeing a lot of changes in our sector-based emissions data currently, if that's helpful for the context of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And I also just want to thank you for all the incredible work that you and your team do to pull together all of that information for the commission. So thank you for your efforts and for those comments. Any other comments on this? So my takeaway on this conversation is that the commission members think that we're headed in the right direction by making a recommendation to up the goals and recommend that they be included in statute, and that maybe the specifics around the year and the level of ambition, if we could direct staff to engage some of the key agencies who have been putting a lot of thought into that, especially around the two biggest programs, the CPP and House Bill 2021, but also others that are in the works, that you come back to us with a more specific proposal. Also, potentially, go back and reflect what the IPCC has suggested, and the specifics of the timeline or the baseline that those specifics are tied to compared to Oregon's baseline. Make sure that we are kind of constructing it in a way that works with our existing 1990 baseline, if that's still appropriate. So that's kind of my takeaway from this conversation. Anyone is there something I missed, or any additions or modifications that commissioners want to suggest to that kind of summary in terms of the direction and next steps on the goal? Okay. Not seeing any. So thank you. And we will have public comment, but we are not closing this out at this meeting, so we won't come back and make decisions after the public comment. At least that's my recollection of the agenda. Is that correct? Do I have that correct, Zach?
Yes, you do, Chair McDonald.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to 4A, and I can't remember who wanted to talk about 4A. Oh, we didn't. We jumped over the 2050 goal, but perhaps the 2050 goal is a similar situation. Maybe we ask staff to come back with a couple of alternatives that reflect those big programs, and maybe we at least hold the conversation on the 2050 goal until the end of the meeting and go ahead and go to number 4. Now that you've repositioned us to 2050,
No problem, Chair McDonald. And that's how I took your summary. So I think we're good there.
okay, great. So let's jump to 4 then.
Commissioner McDonald, that was, I was the person who had a
Oh,
question
great.
about
Thank
that.
you, Commissioner Pardue.
And it's really, I'm just kind of curious. I mean, when we got the great news from the Tigger analysis about, the big benefits of the current legislation, I kind of thought maybe Tigger was TGTBT. But I'm curious. My question is really about the energy policy simulator, and just kind of wondering, 4B is all about public engagement. The energy policy simulator has the advantage of being open source and accessible to everybody in the public, whereas Tigger is kind of a black box where it's kind of unknown what is generating the scores that it's generating. Has there been kind of a side-by-side analysis of the two methodologies for generating the scoring of different options? And have we evaluated whether we should, begin, considering using this open source and free platform rather than continuing to invest in a proprietary platform? And really, with all the dynamic changes going on, there may be some advantages to an open source platform versus a closed source one.
Agreed, Commissioner Pardue. There is more that, and I think we've got a representative from SSG on, but I think there is more we can do with the SSG's model to make it interactive. And it has some advantages. One, some could argue because it's built from county-based information, recognizing, where that is appropriate. But I really like the way that the policy simulator is set up, and like that it's easy to use. So I think, one of the challenges is that these two programs were kind of going on side by side, and we did try and talk with the modelers we did talk with the modelers from the policy simulator and compared notes on the assumptions and things like that were going into these. And so, I think continuing that dialogue and thinking about what's the best strategy for the next iteration, I'm very open to that. And thinking through what would best provide the information. I think in either case, we would need funding to be able to gather the information to update whichever platform we were talking about. So I think the idea of making sure that we've got resources to be able to keep that current and do that work, whether we picked one platform or the other, or figured out a way to to get the best of both, from my own vantage point, and I think would be smart for us to do. Others have other feelings about that.
It feels like a relatively important element in all of this, because so much of the action plan depends on this particular output. And I can't look inside the the Tigger box, so I have no idea what's going on there. Just kind of thinking in general principles here rather than a specific, digging in on anything. So I appreciate the consideration of that.
And one of the things that we were hoping to do before now, and are still aspiring to do it, is to make that all the assumptions crystal clear. And we've got a table that does that so that people can look at all the assumptions that went into the existing model. So it's not, the design of it is not black box. It's just that, with the process, it's taken us a little longer to get all of that consolidated in one place. So I think we could we could think about, as I mentioned, what's the best platform? What would be the best way for us to be able to use the best of both models and to inform our actions as both effectively and efficiently as possible over time.
Okay, thank you.
Chair McDonald, if I might interject. This is
Yes,
Alan
thank you.
Blanchard.
Thank you.
We did do the analysis on the results coming out of the two different models, and they were pretty much online, same trajectory downward. The one main difference we found in them is that the policy simulator didn't assume that the CPP achieved its full greenhouse gas reductions, and we didn't get very good answer why they chose to do that. But that was the result that resulted in a little bit of difference in what the Tigger model does and what the policy simulator. The other differences are that there's a lot more Oregon specific data, that we spent months collecting Oregon specific data, putting it into the model to the point where and collected it at the county level. So the policy simulator is only state level, while the Tigger model is actually aggregated up from the county level. So when we were showing you before the analysis of the jobs and the other kinds of co-benefits, we could show you that at a county level and what the impacts were. You can't do that with the energy policy simulator. There is we are going to put SSG is working on a dashboard that will help us pull that together. And then as Chair McDonald said, we have a spreadsheet that has all the assumptions and all the numbers in there that you'll be able to see. That'll make it very transparent. We were hoping to have that out already, but we've been working to try to get this stuff done, as opposed to put this the work that we're doing for today's meeting as a higher priority than getting that out. But that will be the next big thing that we end up doing besides the scoring.
Definitely going forward, really thinking through how to best inform our work and being open about how to best do that, I think is important. Thank you, Alan. Other comments on 4A? Commissioner Sheeran?
Sure, thank you, Chair McDonald. I just want to understand, so, I mean, the Tigger analysis, this year, the version we're wrapping up, was meant to identify sort of the next additional steps the state should take or consider taking to achieve its GHG goals. Now it seems like we're talking about how do we make sure we're on track to meet those GHG reduction goals. And I want to understand a little better than how, an additional analysis, whether through Tigger or a different, or a different, consulting tool, would be additive to the work that, Elizabeth and her team DEQ already do in terms of that annual sectoral emissions reporting, as well as any additional emissions reporting that is required as per compliance with, various state programs, everything from HB 2021 to, the CPP and things in between. So I think that's just the piece that I'm missing. And I'd love to understand that a little bit more, because I feel like the state already has DEQ sort of, poised and ready to continue to, as Elizabeth just did, tell us that we are sadly still not on track.
I think my sense of the benefit of it would be that, we've got a set of assumptions in the new actions that we described. Likely legislation that might be proposed might vary from that. And so if a new program's adopted, but it's not the full scope or as ambitious, we kind of want to continue to keep track of where do we think our forecast for the benefits of any of the actions that have been adopted and are underway will get us, versus where do we need to put more and where should we put more ambition. So I think it's in part to kind of track how things are getting implemented. That would be part of my answer. I don't know, Alan, if you want to weigh in on this as well. Alan?
Kathy, I'll jump in.
And
Um,
Alan's on mute, just so you know, Alan, but go ahead.
Okay,
Director
sorry, I
Weaver.
wasn't sure if.
No, that's okay.
I'm happy to cede to him. I was just killing time while he was coming up mute.
Okay. Alan, do you want to jump in then? I think you're on, oh, you still are on mute. Well, Janine, do you want to play Alan on TV?
Sure, he might be having computer problems, but I think Commissioner Sheeran's point is very good about the existing resources at DEQ. But my understanding is that they're looking at what are the emissions for current, what are the current emissions, so they can look back and say, here's the emissions in 2021. And the value of an analysis like the TIGR analysis is, I think, exactly what you said, Kathy, forward-looking. Of all the things we are doing as a state, are they going to get us to our goals? So as Alan is chatting me, it's DEQ is now and TIGR is the future.
Great, thank you. Yeah, when I think back on the last two reports and the forecast that we had in the last two reports, which really dated back to 2016 policies, you know, it doesn't give the public or decision makers didn't give them an accurate picture anymore. And I would imagine as we learn more about how these different programs are being implemented and any new programs, that it'll be really helpful for us to have new forecasts and have a way to analyze potential policies and programs. Okay. Any other? So what I'm taking away from this is that and this may be overstepping, so please do push back if I'm taking this farther, that the idea of having ongoing information to inform our climate action is important, that exactly how we determine, you know, what that work looks like maybe could vary from the way it's described here, and that we want to make sure that we're using the best tool we can use, taking advantage of the best information that's out there, and doing that as efficiently and effectively as we can. Is that a reasonable summary of the conversation of this, of 4A? Any corrections, amendments? I see that Senator Dembro is with us now. Thanks for joining. Any thoughts on what you think would be useful for the legislature, or thoughts from you on this recommendation?
Thanks, Kathy. Not on this recommendation specifically, but I've actually been attending as an attendee, and I was just I was promoted. I feel very successful suddenly. But I did want to say something about the earlier discussion about the you know, the statutory goals and updating them. And I do think that there is real merit in that. You know, it's something we wanted to do a few years ago. And, you know, part of it is, you know, we're one of a number of states that has goals in statute, and it's unfortunate to have outdated goals. So I think there's real merit in doing that, as well as just setting direction for future work. So I really applaud Nora's call for us to get some consensus on what the scientific consensus is right now and incorporate that in this year, either as a standalone bill or as part of some you know, broader work that we may be doing with the commission and its structure and its purpose.
Thank you, Senator Dembro. And thanks for being with us today.
Sure.
Any other comments on 4A? Okay. Then I see we've got interest in talking about 5B. I think Commissioner Potowski. Linda, can you unmute Suzanne Carlson from ODOT again?
Yes, just a minute. Okay. Oh, wow. Just a minute. I think I'll just promote her and get her in so she can
That
unmute.
would make sense because she is
Yeah.
standing in for
Okay.
ODOT director.
Suzanne.
And then maybe we can go ahead and talk about A.
Okay.
And I think it was Commissioner Potowski that was interested in talking about 5B. So let's go to 5B.
Okay, thank you, Chair McDonald. And I'll just be very brief. I think some other voting members, especially underserved community members, would be great. From my perspective, I'm coming from a technical perspective. And I was just on a conference call this morning with a person from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council. They look at broad energy issues for the whole region. And they look at, transition to EVs. They're looking at fuel cells. What does that mean for energy? They look at climate change and how that affects migration patterns to the Pacific Northwest. So I think there would be someone from there as a non-voting official would be a great complement to the Oregon Department of Energy and DEQ in bringing that sort of more regional perspective. And they do a lot of research in the areas that we're looking at, and they don't cost anything.
Thank you, Commissioner Potowski. We actually, up until last fall, fall of 2020, maybe it was last fall, we had Council Member Devlin, who was on the commission.
Oh, yes,
One
yes.
of those ex officios, and I agree with you. It was helpful to get his input, and it would be interesting to consider bringing either one of the council members or one of the staff members from the council to continue to inform us.
Okay, thank you.
And also note the idea of getting folks that are experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and think about that. I think we've got some members of the commission that do a fair amount of that, but adding more could always help, and maybe making that a more official seat at the table, which in terms of voting members than it is currently. Other comments about adding agencies on a non-voting perspective, from a non-voting perspective, and or modifying the voting members?
Chair McDonald, this is Gabriella Goldfarb with OHA,
Yes.
and maybe might be very bad form suggesting another agency, but I know our partnership with Oregon Housing and Community Services is increasing, and when we think about the Inflation Reduction Act and what huge implications there are for the housing sector, and for the recommendations from this commission, it seems, and the investments that the state is making on its own, it seems like that might be important voice to have at the table if they're willing and able.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriella. That's an interesting idea. Commissioner Magnera?
Building off of that idea of including more voices who represent environmental justice communities or can speak to environmental justice, I think it would be interesting to explore what it would look like to have a more tied relationship between this body and the reforming Environmental Justice Task Force, which is now becoming the Environmental Justice Council. I hesitate a little bit to ask for cross membership there, just because a lot of the folks who will sit on that body are going to be stretched very thin in many ways and called upon in different spaces. But it might be worth having a representative of the of this body or one of the agencies who work with it, work with the governor's environmental equity committee to come up with a proposal for how best to have the Environmental Justice Council and the Oregon Global Warming Commission work together. And then perhaps also they will have some other ideas about how best to integrate other spheres of environmental justice representation into this work.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Magnera. Gabriella?
Yeah, just building on that, I wanted to note that the Environmental Justice Council is going to be overseeing the development of the environmental justice mapping tool and conducting extensive community engagement in that process. To that point, and the Environmental Justice Council does have representation, for example, from the equity commissions, from the, for example, Commission on Black Affairs, Commission on Asia Pacific Islander Affairs, et cetera. So there's a precedent for other statutory commissions to have representation on that council.
Great, thank you. Good opportunity there. Senator Dembro.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just following up on Oriana's suggestion, which I think is a great one. I do, I am cognizant of the challenge, the time commitment, but I do think if we can't get someone to be a permanent member of this commission, it would be great to have periodic, regular reports from them, so that there can be more interaction between these two bodies.
Yeah, a great idea. Other comments? Are there other types of representation that we would like to consider adding? I know one of the public commenters made a comment that based on their assessment that this commission doesn't have a younger Oregonians on it, and based on their assessment may not do a good job of representing lower income Oregonians. And so that was one of the comments that was brought to our attention. Any thoughts on those two observations?
I'll just mention that the EJ Council bill from last session did appoint a youth member to the Environmental Justice Council, and that young person attended and made a really great impact in the conversation.
Great. Commissioner Magnera?
I'd just like to show really strong support for the suggestion of having a youth member. Youth are some of the folks who are going to be most impacted by what's to come with climate change. And so taking those voices into account, I don't think we do that enough in policy making. And I think there are a lot of creative solutions to be had from folks who have not been through some of the rounds that some of us in this space have been.
Great. Commissioner Apter agrees with that. Okay. Other input on this particular? And if I recall, one of the reasons that staff had recommended that we stay focused on the non-voting members was, concerns that if we open up the voting membership, it might lead to some unintended consequences. So any comments on any concerns about extending the recommendations to both voting and non-voting membership of the commission, pros and cons from anyone.
This is Commissioner Reitman. I would just like to say that we tend to unanimously agree on whatever issue is before us, so I don't think it's a big issue.
In terms of if we invited new people on, but made
Right.
them non-voting members.
Right. The decisions we make have not, we've been able to come to consensus so far.
Commissioner or Senator Dembro?
Yeah, no, I agree with Tom, but where I've seen commissions get into trouble is when they have so many members, they get into quorum problems, and that can be a challenge. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, generally, the quorum is a quorum of the voting members.
That's a really good point. And we have 11 voting members now. We'd also want to think about making sure that we were keeping it at an uneven number as well, to make sure that, if, in cases where we don't all agree, we can make a decision. So that's a good point. So I'll summarize what I think I heard in terms of direction to staff. We like the idea of including either someone from the housing and community, Oregon Housing and Community Services. Thank you. I wrote housing twice, so like the idea of maybe exploring that, would direct staff to do some outreach to see if, what that might look like. Like the idea of having someone from the council be on the commission if that proves to be challenging because of just the bandwidth of members of the council, that we consider other approaches like some regular reporting, making sure we're going in front of their council when appropriate, and vice versa. And then I think there was support for youth, and we didn't specifically hear about lower income, but I think that's probably something we should be reflecting on. And so and then, the value of the Power Council in terms of who's on the commission. We do have some members who are currently past their term. We did a little homework on this, and you can serve and act in the way that you acted within your term until you get reappointed. My goal is to reach out to those commissioners, determine, interest level and commitments to stay engaged in this. And then we would be doing an open search and providing, or, letting people know that there may be some vacancies coming up, and then we could go make recommendations to the governor when we finish that. So my intent is to have some follow-up conversations with those members and put that into the mix as we think about how to propose we might change the membership of the commission. We want to make sure we're developing a proposal that doesn't have us running into quorum issues. I don't think we've had a quorum issue in the last year, which is great, maybe in the last 2 years. So I'm really pleased by that, at least once we got some new members on board in 2021. And so I think we're directing staff to do a little homework, at least on those first 2 points, and then come back to us with a more specific proposal. Any friendly amendment, Commissioner Podolsky?
Yes, this on the side. Thank you, Commissioner McDonald. Could you possibly send out a reminder to us commissioners who have not completed the commission governance and diversity training online?
Absolutely.
I think I'm one of the guilty ones.
Okay. We will pull that. I think Linda has access to that information and can summarize that for us. And then I think we're going to be updating the membership list of the commission. We have a lot of agency directors who have departed their agency positions, and so we'll be updating all of that. And then we'd like to probably add the term for each of the commissioners is on our webpage, just so that we have a clearer view of that, and so that the public does as well. Any other amendments or considerations about this recommendation? Okay. Next on the list is 5E.
Chair McDonald, we might want to take E and F together because they're rooted in the same kind of theory of what we were trying to get at with those recommendations. They're both based on general directives in the executive order.
Thank you. Would you mind walking us through these two on my behalf?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So Executive Order 20-04, which has driven a lot of the programs and policies that we've talked about as part of the TICR process. There were, in addition to the specific directives that folks had that were included in the executive order and that agencies have worked to implement, there were general directives specifically around basically maximizing the use of the agency's authority to try to address climate change, considering climate mitigation and adaptation in agency budgets and investments and actions. And then there was also some general directives around considering equity and the impacts to underserved communities and underrepresented communities. And so these two recommendations are aimed at the idea that maybe those general directives need to be reinforced in via statute. And so there were a couple of recommendations to that end in our previous biennial report, the 2020 biennial report. And so these kind of bring those recommendations over and basically say to include those general directives in statute.
Thank you, Zach. I don't remember who raised wanting to talk about E and F, but if you want to kick us off, be great.
I think it was Director Benner, and I believe she had to drop off.
Yeah, okay. Well then, anyone else have comments on that? On these two?
This is Commissioner Apter. I'm happy to share some thoughts. I think this seems like a really smart idea. This is a really important directive to state agencies, but I think there's what we've seen in implementation is kind of varying degrees of interpretation and application of these directives. And so I think enshrining them in statute would help ensure uniformity across agencies. And that's especially important, again, going back to the federal funding conversation, which I know we'll talk about more once we get to number 6. But we know that funding decisions can really kind of make or break our climate goals, as well as have really significant implications in terms of equity and affordability. And so I think having that directive as state agencies are receiving and then considering how to strategically invest and implement federal dollars is really, really important with, billions of dollars on the table in the coming years.
Great. Other comments on ENF? Senator Dembro.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just wondering about the timing of this. We are obviously going to go into session in January. And, if there may be some placeholder bills out there that these things can be included in, or we're still timely to request new drafts. So I'm just wondering, when do you think the commission would be in a position to make a recommendation here?
Great question.
We have a meeting in December, do we?
We do, but close to the end of, the end of the time before the holidays. So I think we're thinking about it.
The plan was,
go ahead, Zach.
sorry. The schedule that we have now would have the commission make a final decision on all the recommendations at the January meeting. But I think we could also, if needed, parse out some that need earlier recommendation to be able to help facilitate legislative work. And, these particular ones are not specific to the Tigger analysis per se.
Yeah, we could take a vote today about D&E, or, if there are others that we would feel confident enough about, at least the general concept, maybe that would allow us to go ahead and manage that. I don't know, Janine and Alan or others, Director Benner or Alan or others on a downside of us kind of adopting these in concept and moving them forward today. Senator Dembro, do you have your hand up again? Or?
Yeah, well, it's kind of still up because I'm still thinking.
Okay.
But we are, we will have a meeting in December. Is that right?
We will. I think it's someplace near between maybe the 18th and the 20th or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think that'll be fine because anything that would go into legislation, at this point would have to be either through the amendment process or through a new draft. And I think if we made some decisions at the December meeting, which would give people time to think, and if there were any additional elements that they would like included, then we could talk about, they'd have warning, they could think about it, we could talk about, and we could then, you could then vote on it in December.
Great. I like that idea because one of the things that we're hoping to be able to do is build out a little more fleshed out recommendation for all of these elements. And, for any ones that I think the commission feels confident enough about voting on, we could do that at that meeting and make sure we're kind of moving those forward. Great. Okay. Any last comments on D&E? And then Zach, given that Director Benner brought these up, if you could just also make sure you connect with Director Benner and if there was a different thought on it, maybe you and I can discuss that and see how that might change what we come back in terms of a recommendation. And it could be we have two alternative statements or something like that we could consider. Thank you. Okay. So we did 5E and F. We've got 6, and then I wanted to come back to the question of adding a recommendation around education. And one other point before we go to public comment. So Commissioner Apter. I think you flagged 6.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. I just wanted to, express support for this. Probably sound like a broken record at this point, but I do think that the more specificity we can provide in terms of how the state can best position itself to take advantage of federal investments will be really important, especially going into this session. So I might recommend that we add maybe some additional recommendations around, for example, adequately resourcing state energy and environmental agencies so that they have the capacity to leverage and administer funding, making sure that we have, again, kind of going back to 5E and F, uniform application of climate and greenhouse gas emissions considerations in federal funding decisions. I think that's really important across the board, but especially for some of the infrastructure funding and projects that will be developed. And likewise, I think ensuring that there are, strong and as much as possible uniform application of equity considerations so that funding is prioritized for those communities that would most benefit from these incentives, as well as workforce development considerations and requirements. So those are just some examples. And then I think this is included in the language, the italicized language around ensuring funds are used to engage and serve communities most in need. I think that's really important. And again, making sure that the state executive and administrative branches have a structure for public engagement that is transparent and really enables input from a diverse and broad demographic of Oregonians, and has, opportunities for input as far as how are we spending money, as well as opportunities to benefit from those incentives so that Oregonians can avail themselves of these unprecedented funds and grants, is really important. So, sorry, I guess just one more thought too. This maybe goes back to point 1 around additional policies that we can adopt now, but I think considering where there's, new complementary incentive programs or policies that will better position Oregon to be competitive for some of the grant opportunities, and just better positioned to harness funds is also part of this. So kind of complementary policies and incentives, as well as adequate funding and resources for agencies and the executive to direct and harness funds.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. Be interested to hear from any agency staff that are with us, and or Senator Dembro, on how much insight we have into being able to shape that today, given where the federal policies and programs are in development, and what if anything in the short run we should be thinking about to make sure we really we have the best understanding of what's coming towards us and what we would need to do to be able to take best advantage of that. Any thoughts to share on how much we know today and when we might know more?
I think it's still in flux, Madam Chair. I think there's consensus that the states that are going to be best positioned to receive dollars are those that really have a coordinated approach across the state agencies, and really have the kind of strategy that Commissioner Apter mentioned. And so I am hoping, we're obviously in a transition time, which complicates things a little. I mean, in terms of having a new governor, having new legislative leaders. But I think as soon as we can, we are going to want to do that. And, we are considering legislation that might help with that or provide more direction around that. But I think it's still early days for that. I do think this commission has a real role to play. That's my own thought. But, you know, it obviously needs to get broad acceptance.
Thank you, Senator Dembro. Any comments from any of our agency colleagues that are here with us? Or the PUC? Okay. Those seem like all good additions.
Chair McDonald, I just wanted to say, this is Gabriella with Oregon Health Authority. It's just would defer to Department of Energy, DEQ, and ODOT, who are seeing the major parts of those funds, and those directors are in conversation, coordinating having coordinating discussions exactly on the point that Senator Dembro was making. So it might be worth having, since you're going to be meeting again. It's just too bad that Director Benner had to step off, because she would be able to speak well to this.
Great. I think it will be helpful. Maybe at our next meeting, we could invite one of the representatives of that group, as well as potentially one or two of the natural resource agencies who can speak to the natural and working land side of the House, to come talk to us and help us understand what they think they might need to make sure they're in good standing to be able to take advantage of the federal funding, because there's a significant federal funding available on the natural resource side too. Great.
With ODOT, I tried to come on video there, but it looked like it was choppy, so apologies. Yeah, there is good coordination going on. There's probably a couple tables for it. So I think this idea of public engagement is good. I'll mention that with the Every Mile Counts multi-agency effort, we've attempted to not just keep doing all that outreach separately. So I know that's a challenge, getting partners to a bunch of different meetings. So I think consolidating that and then being able to say, this is what we've heard, and then we're integrating it in this sort of coordinated way, I think is useful for all parties, hopefully. So noting what Commissioner Apter said, and then saying potentially it's not each time, it's this more consolidated effort. And then, yeah, there's Every Mile Counts, and then there's this climate coordination group as well that Director Benner, I think, would be able to come back and talk about some of that coordination. Obviously, DOT has a bunch of IIJA funds, and we're probably well in progress with how some of those will be used, as well as, of course, a lot of federal guidelines for how that'll be used. So some of it, there's probably some discretionary. I think what we're talking about here maybe is going after some of those grant opportunities, which will be huge, and we'll want a lot of partners together in that direction. Money that came out by formula, probably there's some thinking already underway about how those funds will be spent.
Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate that. Great.
Chairman.
Yes.
Director Benner had to step away, but I just wanted to inform people that all the agencies, as was just said, are working diligently on this and have multiple people tracking all of these and assessing all the different options and opportunities that are available to us, since it is a large amount of money. And there's coordination happening in the climate agency work group, as well as other different avenues where we have shared spreadsheets about what all these mean. Of course, a lot of them still have to be rolled out by the federal government and with the rules and the eligibility, but everybody's working on it. I know in ODA, we've got one point person, but about 10 other people working on different aspects of it. So just wanted to let everybody know that there's a lot of work going on in the state with regard to trying to access this money and put in grants where appropriate.
Great. Well, maybe we can have some conversations between now and our next meeting to shape the recommendation in a way that would support the kinds of things that the agencies are learning. So definitely follow up with you and others about that between now and our next meeting. Great. Any last comments on 6? Did you put your hand back up, Alan, or did you forget to take it down?
No, sorry, bad hand.
That's okay. I looked down for a minute. So, Danny, I think I heard your voice. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight that we can look at the climate adaptation framework that was finished in January of 21. And there was a proposal in there to kind of form up a natural working lands group that was broader than just natural working lands, but would kind of look enterprise-wide at funding priorities and mechanisms to fund things.
Great. I will take a look at that and follow up with you about that.
And that was run through DLCD, so.
Correct. Thank you. Appreciate that. And thanks for joining us today on behalf of the department. Okay, then the last topic I think we have is to just, would we like to include an additional recommendation that is more focused on education? The commission does have a statutory duty to educate Oregonians. And so it would definitely be in keeping with our statutory duties. We have not had a lot of funding to do anything outside of the commission meetings that we have and the work that ODO supports with our webpage. But we could definitely kind of think about some options for how we might want to reinforce that or expand it. I feel like we probably haven't been doing justice to that work in the past few years, or probably ever during our history, given the very limited resources that we've had. Commissioner Reitman, it looks like you might want to.
Oh, I would just comment that on the natural and working lands front, there's huge opportunities for education of how we manage our land. And so I think that we're remiss in not doing more of that in the past, and we certainly need to step up and make it a priority.
Thank you, Commissioner Reitman. Commissioner Magnera?
Building off that some, perhaps, I've been thinking a lot about some of the messaging opportunities and the relationship building opportunities that I don't know for sure if this body is the right one to help facilitate, especially with a name like Oregon Global Warming Commission. But I think like where there's an exacerbation of the urban and rural divide around climate issues, I think there's a lot of need within the state to
You just cut out, Commissioner Magnera, at least on my
shared
end.
understanding and helping to create shared language as well. Because I think a lot of the language we use in this body, we use in kind of more Portland-centric spaces can be alienating to other communities. And that, to Commissioner Reitman's point, there's a lot of opportunity to learn about the ways that rural communities in the state are helping to sequester carbon and helping to contribute. So I wonder if it's framing it around that. Like, again, I don't know that this body is like the right body to go into a community like Lake County where I live and, share climate words from a Portland-centric perspective. But I think if there are ways to build relationship and build understanding and also learn from communities in different parts of the state, and that's probably not just like rural Eastern Oregon communities, but coastal communities as well. I think that could be a good signal that this body is trying to be representative of the state and not just a narrow set of interests.
Agreed. Good point. And the other thing to think about is who else is maybe well positioned to be able to have some of those conversations, and it probably needs to be many different kinds of conversations. And we certainly have a lot of folks, especially in the natural and working land space, that do a lot of technical assistance and are well trusted by some of our rural landowners and land managers. So maybe thinking about what's the commission's role versus, who are the other entities that are out and in good position to help us have the different kinds of conversations that we need to have. So it's a good point that we could build into the recommendation. Senator Dembro.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I don't really have anything to add to what Commissioner Manera said. I think it's a really great point, and we should definitely put a pin in it and figure out what we can do to, address that very important need. I did want to ask, sort of going back to the commission membership, do we have representation from the Climate Research Institute? I know they
Currently.
provide us with information, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't have someone as sitting on this.
Yeah, I've thought about that too. The director of the Institute has been hosting regular get-togethers with a number of folks. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the one that was earlier this week. And we did get our Oregon Department of Energy got a practicum student last spring who helped with some of the work that ended up going into the biennial energy report, I think, and is certainly very complementary to some of the information that the commission needs. So I think there's an interest there, and it would be interesting to explore that further. We currently have 3 slots for either additional agencies or academic partners. And so that we could think about maybe expanding that a little bit, or just as I check in with some of the folks that are in those positions to make sure they have an ongoing interest in being on the commission. We could also, think about inviting the director or someone else at OCRE to join the commission in one of those slots.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else that commissioners think are missing from the broad framework, recognizing that we haven't tackled the third, which is all the new actions that should be done, other than a few comments. I think when we were talking about additional actions and the original, supporting implementation of the existing programs, where we touched on the need for some additional actions. Anything else that we might have missed in going through this? Not seeing hands, but then I want to, I haven't seen any. So if there are no others, this is certainly not the last word, and we'll have an opportunity in December and in January to add additional recommendations and to frame up the recommendations we have more specifically. I did want to just remind folks of the reference to the comments that we got, and in particular, would encourage you all to take a look at the report that is cited in one of the public comments from Eric Strid that has links to a decarbonization plan that was led by folks at Lewis and Clark. And there may be some ideas in that we want to make sure we reflect in our recommendations. So please do go and take a look at that if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it. The links, as I see from the chat, the links work now, and I think Zach mentioned the links work. So, and consider those and bring any ideas that you glean from that work to our meeting on in December. Excuse me. Any final comments, and then we'll open it up for public comment. I think you can take down the recommendations. That way we can see each other a little bit better, and I can see hands. Now, how many folks have signed up for public comment?
I have people who've made comments in the chat itself, but not actually signed up for public comment. We've had, let's see, I've had, well, it's Eric, definitely. So let's go with Eric right away.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. Welcome.
Taking my extra comments here. I put a lots in the written comments, but something came to mind as you're speaking here on number 1 and 2. I strongly feel that the 2035 goal should be moved to 2030, and further that it should be 25 or rather 50% per the IPCC strong requirements. And the GEI, or the Green Energy Institute at Lewis and Clark, their plan is an example of an Oregon scenario that achieves 50% by 2030. And it's all open source, so you can get in there and play with the policy knobs if you want to play with that scenario. But my point is, I don't think we should be, well, there's 3 big areas to work on: electricity, transportation, and natural gas. Well, electricity is already going out flat out as fast as they can, and electrifying buildings will take a long time. But electric vehicles, I think, could be further leveraged. Examples include Washington State, where they're targeting 100% EV sales by 2030, not 2035. The Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy that EQC is considering right now would ramp up to 100% sales by 2030. The Lewis and Clark scenario points out that it's possible to squeeze the low carbon fuel standard parameters even further. Now, I don't know how physically feasible that one is, but it's certainly something to look at. And we definitely ought to look at what Washington is thinking about, because there is such a exponential demand for EVs out there today. I just saw a story about China, who has always been the largest provider. Now they provide more EVs, build more EVs than all the rest of the world combined. They're headed to 100% sales around 2030 as well. Norway is headed to 100% by 2025, but they're too socialist for us to want to do. China's headed for 60% of EV sales quite soon. So I think EVs are an untapped opportunity to keep up with China. Every automaker in the world is scrambling and pouring in. There's an estimate of $1.2 trillion being invested in EVs and EV supply chains. So if you want to increase or accelerate decarbonization by 2030, I think EVs is the place to look. And 2B, the 2050 goal, I think is nearly important, because the 2030 goal gives us a lot more emission reductions over those years, plus it saves many more billions of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate your written comments and those comments you added. Any other, and we will capture all of the comments in the chat at the end of the meeting and make sure we've got those. Oh, go ahead.
Susan Carlson, I'm sorry, but let's go ahead and I'm going to have, you can unmute yourself. I didn't let you know that, but you can. And you did write something in the chat, but maybe you'd like to comment. You are unmuted. Susan?
Maybe while we're waiting for Susan, I saw that Josh Proudfoot had your hand up.
Okay.
You want to make comments, then we'll go back to Suzanne.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Josh Proudfoot from Good Company. Just wanted to encourage and support the revision of the goals. We have no customers that are choosing anything other than 1.5 or better. Corporate side, local governments, etc. There are a few state agencies that are feeling a little trapped, but it depends on who you talk to about that. But I would say that goal revision I know that also will affect regulatory stuff, is super important. And it's where the rest of the world is going. So thank you. I think that's one of the most important things. And we've been basically trying to explain why the state hasn't caught up with that for a couple of years. So we'd appreciate seeing that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate your comments today. Suzanne, are you unmuted now?
I am. I apologize. I stepped away for a moment. Did someone direct a question at me?
We thought you might want to provide the comment that you put in the chat. We are going to collect all the comments from the chat, but if you wanted to
oh, sure.
also speak to it, you're welcome to.
Yeah, this was 30 minutes or so ago. We've been talking at a staff level that ODOT is going to be doing a performance management dashboard showing projections for greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector specifically. And we have a different methodology than what was used with the Tigger report. So I was just kind of noting that there may be different methodologies at play, and doesn't mean we have to have the same methodology, but we might just sync that up and just talk about how we communicate that we've looked at different things or made different assumptions as we consider continuing to do projections going forward.
Absolutely. And Suzanne, I know that I and the ODO staff have really appreciated the outreach from ODOT to, help think about the similarities and differences in the approach that we're taking, if not to sync it up as much as possible, because there can be good reasons for having different methodologies, at least to be able to explain it, because I think when you have 5 or 6 answers out there, it can create more confusion and slow things down. But if we can explain the differences and the benefits of different approaches for different purposes, I think that's always a good thing. So thank you for your agency for the outreach you've done to us about that. Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to something that Eric Strid comment that there is a big part of the biennial energy report. It's called Charting the Course for Oregon's Energy Future, and it breaks it down. What's the path towards decarbonization and what the issues are, and it looks at about 20 different studies in the West and compares and contrasts them in terms of all the different aspects. In terms of the 3 that Eric mentioned, which is the electricity sector, natural gas, and transportation. And then there's a 4th one on trade-offs between the different policies that we need. So I commend that. We'll send that out to all the commissioners as discrete chapters as an email or something like that, so you can access them, because it is pretty long, but it's very in-depth and very informative. Want to get
yeah, great. Thank you. You mentioned that to me, and I haven't had a chance to dig into it yet. And I really value all the work that's done as part of the biennial energy report. And it sounds like that specific resource could be incredibly helpful to commission members and to the public. Climate action is so broad and technical and complex with all the considerations. So having a way to kind of educate all of us as much as possible about the ins and outs of all of that, I think it's incredibly valuable. So thank you.
If you'd like, we could come up with a pop quiz for the next meeting for people.
Okay, that sounds good. Gabriella.
This is Jessica Rickers at Odo. I just wanted to flag for the committee that I threw the link in there for that specific policy brief into the chat if people want to go take a look.
Great, thank you. Excellent. Alan, you can take your hand down, and Gabriella, floor is yours.
I just wanted to expand on something I put in the chat, but wanted to flag that now in an era where looks like there's going to be significant resources, that question of how you actually get those resources to the people who most need them and who we want to prioritize having them, or anybody. In fact, it's very daunting, and as much as agencies are trying to coordinate, a lot of this is based on federal agencies who are themselves siloed, And, our agencies are always working to get past the silos. And how do you get that person at the end of the pipe who, needs to navigate between the building rehab that has to happen before the insulation goes in and the electrical panel upgraded and, on and on. And so we're having in different forums discussions among agencies, but there's also a forum that Energy Trust has been housing where Representative Pam Marsh has been sitting, and I believe that she is going to be looking at some legislation around this issue. She's looking for ideas around that, but that's something that all of us agencies are going to be grappling with, and how to do that to really serve people is going to be a big issue.
Great. Thank you for flagging that for us. And I think it would be great to get in touch with Representative Marsh and see kind of what her existing thoughts are and how they might mesh with some of the ideas that we've been talking about. Thank you. Other public comments?
Eric, did you have an additional comment or did you just raise your hand? Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Arlene Sherritt, you had a suggestion about aligning targets with our neighboring states. Do you want to comment on that? Just a moment.
Arlene, welcome.
Hi, Arlene.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Great. That question or suggestion came back when you were discussing tightening the laws and the targets, tightening the targets. I just suggested looking at neighboring states for more guidance.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. There's a great website that has pretty up-to-date information on goals from all of the states and whether they're in statute or executive order. And we put the current list in 2020 in the 2020 report, and I imagine we'll probably do the same in the in either the biennial 2022 report or in the roadmap, just as context for folks and thinking about this. And then I believe that yesterday I heard an announcement from California, and I don't know if it was their new scoping plan that got released or some other document, but a new release of kind of how they're proposing to achieve their goals. So I haven't had a chance to put it on my reading list yet, but that might provide some up-to-date thinking that we could draw from.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other public comment, Linda, that you want to?
No, I do not see any additional comments, and I do not see any additional hands at this time.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I think we let's maybe go back to Zach, if you could share the slide deck and we can just take one last look at the next steps that we've identified. We have some action items that we can summarize from and direction that we can summarize, but I don't know that it's necessarily a good use of our time collectively because I think we've got it on the record. But let's just pull up that slide deck that has the timeline. Did you skip by it maybe? Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you. So this focuses on the roadmap. And as I mentioned when we were talking about this earlier, given both reports are going to be important, but given that the recommendations will live in in the roadmap, then I think we'll keep this focused on the roadmap. We made there was a suggestion that we give a little more time to the written comments on the draft recommendations. So we were going to extend that, and I believe by a few days to make sure we give the public some time, given the holiday that's coming. We anticipate having our next meeting between December 14th and the 20th. But we've got the doodle poll. If you're a commissioner and you haven't taken the doodle poll yet, please do. We hopefully will have a meeting then. We might need to adjust the recommendations a little bit after the 20th, depending on when our meeting is, but hopefully get that out before holidays, and then meeting in January, kind of mid-January, with a hope that we would be able to finalize the report and get that to Odo's communications team so that they can help us produce a product for the legislature, or 2 products for the legislature. So those are the next steps that we have. I'm also, I think I mentioned earlier that I'm going to have conversations with commission members over the next couple of months, both to take stock of how we're doing as a commission, for those who have terms that have ended, to see if there's interest in continuing, and to start to think about what we do next, what we should be doing over the next, say, 6 months, recognizing that we do have another body of work that we are undertaking, which is the natural and working lands work. That's very important. But also we will be able to use some of our time, I think, to start to take on some of the topics that are important for us to take on going forward. So those are our next steps. Any questions about the next steps or comments? Okay. Seeing none. And if I somehow missed your hand, please go ahead and just jump in. This was a packed agenda, and so thank you all for paying really close attention, for the great comments and questions that you raised. Thanks to the public for the input, both in writing in advance of this meeting and in the comments that were made during the meeting. And thank you all for sticking with a long and dense meeting. And with that, I will bring the November 17th Oregon Global Warming Commission to a close. We'll get the minutes or the recording posted quickly, and update the slide deck and make sure the updated slide deck is posted as well, so that people know what our timeline looks like. Thank you all.
Thank you.